I've been told by folks in France that it's kind of the opposite. Like Islamic Muslim immigrants are kind of shunned and aren't integrated by the French people themselves. I'm not sure how true that is. I don't have a lot of firsthand experience in it, but how much of that is part of what's happening in this right-left, Donnybrook occurring in France? Because they're literally on the streets fighting and rioting.
Yeah, look, I don't think that the youth's demand for socialism is what's driving the results in France at all. Let me explain what happened. So the way that the voting works in France, it's a unusual system to our eyes, where they have a first round of voting. And in that first round of voting, Marine Le Pen's party National Rally won a strong plurality of the vote. And the map looked like this, where literally they won every district in the country except for Paris. I mean, it was a really dominant performance. And so people were expecting major reform. And J-Cal, you're right that Marine Le Pen's major issue, her party, is the unlimited immigration that's taken place into France. The French people, or a substantial portion of them, are up in arms about this. And actually, this is something that's very common across all of Europe. They're
very nationalistic. Let's call it what it is. They care about their culture.
The indigenous people of France are opposed to this settler colonial invasion that's happening from the global south. And they want to preserve their French culture and society and nation as it has always been. And they do not see how this unlimited immigration from the global south is good for them. It's not good for them economically. It's not good for societal cohesiveness. It's not good for crime, and so on. So this is undoubtedly a huge driver of National Rally's success. But then what happened is that in the French system, there's a second round of voting a week later, and we got these results, where National Rally still got the plurality of the vote. They got 37% of the vote, but they only won 142 seats, whereas Macron's party got 22% of the vote, won 148, and then a collection of parties called the New Popular Front, which is basically a collection of far-left parties under the radical socialist Jean-Luc Mélenchon, won only 27% of the vote, but won the most seats. And this is what I think Friedberg's reacting to, is that the socialists ended up with the most seats. Well, how did this happen if National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party, got a lot more votes than New Popular Front? The answer is that Macron, president of France, conspired with the far left to have 200 candidates quit to basically drive those voters, the voters in, let's call it the center left, over to the far left in order to block Marine Le Pen's party from winning the number of seats that they otherwise would have.
So just to recap what you're talking about, they have two rounds of elections here. They have a first round, a second round. If you don't win like the majority in the first round, then it goes to the second round runoff. And then strategically, what Macron and his party did was they took the multiple parties and said, hey, we'll just have you all drop out and consolidate our votes. Almost like in a microcosm in the United States, it would be like RFK dropping out at the last minute and saying, I endorse this person on left or right. So they did a very strategic thing to...
Right, but they went district by district and they basically said, okay...
Great strategy, yeah.
Hold on, in this district, we're going to have Macron's candidate drop out and endorse New Popular Front. Exactly. So that's what they did.
So brilliant.
Well, it's a manipulated result. And what it ends up with, look, a lot of people said, so actually you're saying that they rigged the election. Look, they didn't rig the votes. Okay, I have no reason to believe that the votes aren't real. But they did rig the candidates in order to frustrate the desire of the French people for reform, the reform that Marine Le Pen was offering. And Friedberg, you're interpreting this as basically a big endorsement for socialism. I don't think that's what this is. I think that what happened here is that the center left under Macron was willing to throw the election through legal, I'm not saying they did anything illegal, through legal manipulation.
They consolidated the candidates.
Yeah, exactly. And so to me, it's sad that, one person tweeted that we voted for reform. We voted for national sovereignty. We voted to restrict unlimited immigration. And what we got was communism. This isn't what we voted for.
Right.
And so it's just kind of sad that what's happening is that the system politicians are essentially getting together to frustrate the popular will of the people.
Le Pen's party still got outvoted in each of those districts, right? Is that correct?
Only because
They dropped a candidate.
200 candidates basically were
Dropped out.
strategically dropped out
Brilliant.
in order to throw the vote in those districts.
So
Yeah,
all
they
these
consolidated
systems
it. So
ultimately
smart.
resolve to a two-party system where some minority can hijack one of the parties to enforce their will ideologically. I think that's kind of my point. Sachs, I mean, the day after the election, there was this statement on some of their economic priorities. Increase the tax rate to 90% on income over 400K, drop the retirement age from 64 to 60. I mean, you go down the list, putting in price controls on, free market services and products and goods. This is a lot of what we're seeing kind of repeated in a bunch of different ways. It's all the same story with different characters all over the industrialized world.
You're right about that part. So basically on the heels of this vote, with New Popular Front winning all of these seats, Jean-Luc Mélenchon gives this speech in which he, rails basically against Macron's neoliberal policies. He wants to go back to the restricted number of hours in the work week. He wants a 90% wealth tax and so on across the board. He does want radical socialism. And he says that he will not cooperate with Macron's party. So, I mean, this is like it's almost cartoonish and clownish how much this has backfired on Macron. He was so hell-bent on trying to frustrate Marine Le Pen that he threw the election to New Popular Front, who has now announced that they will not work with him. Okay? Now, Jake Al, you may want to say, well, this is the will of the majority. But the majority of the country did not want to vote for chaos. But chaos is what they've got because now there is no dominant faction in their parliament, right? And New Popular...
By the way, same in India. They just lost majority in India, right? Which is the first time in 12 years. And the UK is also up in disarray.
No, it's a majority, but not a supermajority.
Not a supermajority. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
The good news, Freeberg, is that Mélenchon will not have a majority in the assembly to push through those radical policies that he wants. No faction will have a majority because they're not going to work with each other. You've got three big parties here, or three big groups, and you need two of them working together to get anything done. So what's going to happen is you're just going to have basically a logjam. And like Marine Le Pen said, reform in France is just going to have to wait, and we're going to lose another year.
Do you think socialist ideologies are on the rise in the youth in the industrialized world? And is that showing up in elections around the world?
I think what's happening is that there is a pent-up demand for reform. People are craving reform.
Right.
They understand that the system does not work.
It feels
is
rigged
corrupt.
for everyone.
It feels rigged. It feels corrupt, and it's resistant to reform. And so they are basically clamoring for that, and they will get it wherever they can take it.
In the past, socialism has won when this has happened. This happened after World War I. It's happened multiple times in history where we've seen the socialists rise in these moments.
Well, I don't think it's because socialism is that desirable. I actually think that the desire for reform, I think it is first and foremost looking for what I would call a nationalist populist solution.
Right.
And you can see here that National Rally did do better than New Popular Front, considerably better. But it was the system's desire to hand a victory to New Popular Front that gave them the win. And I think you see a similar thing in the United States. Look, if Joe Biden had just shut down the border for the last 4 years,
huge win.
he would be in a materially different position.
Absolutely.
But the radicals in his party didn't want to do that. So in a way, you could say that you have a similar type of conspiracy taking place where the center left would rather enable and support the radical progressives as opposed to making sensible moderations or sensible adjustments
Which, by
that
the
would
way,
actually make them much more popular.
It would. And what has Trump done in Trump 2.0 that I don't know who could have possibly coached or given any feedback to Trump of how to win this election, but he seems much more presidential. He seems normal. He basically went right to the middle on abortion. He went right to the middle on immigration, and he's not acting like a lunatic and name calling. And his debate performance was fantastic. He just sat back.
By the way, look who's been the most ardent supporter of Joe Biden. It's been the progressive left, right? Those are the folks that have actually said, "Hey," and I think probably it's because there's a underlying quid pro quo at play. AOC,
yes,
Bernie Sanders, all of these folks.
Elizabeth Warren.
If they support Biden and he wins a second term, I suspect that there's going to be a lot of their legislative agenda that basically gets put up for vote.
100%. 100%. Yes.
I think there's a common denominator here that both Macron and Biden would rather throw the government of the country to radicals and communists than implement sensible restrictions on immigration. It's mind-blowing to me that neither Macron nor Biden can simply make a sensible adjustment on immigration. People do not want open borders. They especially don't want them in Europe,
yeah.
and they don't want them here either.
They
That's
want
fair.
reasonable borders, reasonable immigration. Yeah.
If I had to kind of give you my opinion on all of this, I do think that when you look across all of these countries, I do think Freeberg is touching on something, but I think the explanation doesn't have to be this idea that people are embracing socialism. I think there's a much simpler explanation as well, which is that we've gone through a very difficult period of joblessness, of inflation, of high costs. And I think typically what happens is you have governmental turnover in these moments. And so the incumbent gets tossed out and somebody else comes in, and whatever they're saying seems like the new thing. So, for example, in Canada right now, the opposite is trending, which is the liberal socialist government just looks totally incompetent. And it looks like the progressives, when this election happens, is just going to completely run over them. And so that's more of a swing to the right. So I think it's less left or right. I think it's incumbent people who have not done necessarily a great job in these last 4 years getting tossed out for folks that are new.
Yeah.
And I think that explains a lot of these elections more than socialism or anything else.
I really hope you're right. I just worry about like the trend of economic globalization has kind of moved because it used to be that every country kind of looked like its own country politically. And there's just a lot of alignment happening.
Where Sachs is right, it's like, look, it's in every other country of the world, other than the West, you embrace the national traditions that make a culture its own. Like if you came to Sri Lanka, you'd see people in saris, you'd see people dressed in traditional garb. You speak this one language that somewhat complicated, not spoken anywhere else, although we teach English as well. But the point is that there are these cultural traditions, and that's just an example of a country that I know well, but many countries, if you look across Africa, it's the same. If you look across Asia, Central and South America. In the West, it's more of that, you come and there's this kind of like odd monoculture. And I think at some point, people are pushing back against that. I do agree with David that there is that pushback. And I think that that's
America's
a reasonable
very unique in
pushback.
that. America's very unique in that. We had a concept called the melting pot, where you would culturally assimilate. And if you say that today and you were to teach that in schools, I think people would get very upset.
Very upset.
Thinking like
Totally.
you are giving up your culture. No, you've chosen to leave your land and make a new world here in this new experiment called America. And if you assimilate, you're welcome here. If you don't want to assimilate, you're not welcome in America. That's what they taught when we went to school as Gen Xers in the 70s and 80s.
No. So my only point, and I agree with you, Jay Kell, is you, as a country, you're allowed to have those beliefs. It's not that just because you're in the West, you have to throw that out. And all of a sudden you have to succumb to this belief that everybody else's culture is better than the one that you've had for the last 400 or 500 years. I don't think that that's necessarily true. And I think you miss out on a lot by saying that. So to your point, I just think that when you look globally, there's a really interesting quote from Peter Thiel that actually is, he made this comment, which is, if you look at the 10 commandments, he's like, the first and the 10th are the most powerful, because the first one is about looking up, and the second one, and the 10th is not about looking down, and everything else is about looking left and right of you. And he brings it up in this context of all of these commandments, the middle 8, are all about how you should not be looking to the left and the right, figuring out and making yourself getting tilted about the fact that you have less than the other person.
No coveting.
And I just think that there may be something interesting in that idea, which is that what we've really done is we've created tools that have allowed you to just obsess and fantasize about all these random people's lives who you think are perfect, but they're just manufactured trying to get views anyways. And you just leave being angry and thinking your life sucks. And in fact, your life is actually not that bad. And I think if we had more truth and honesty and authenticity, maybe there would be less of this perception and you'd actually try to just enjoy what you have. And I don't think we figured that out.